to everybody, and a big thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I have done this as a presentation, and I'm happy for you to ask questions as I go along. There are quite a few slides, some of which I will pass over, but they'll be there for you to use. They'll be disseminated out with the resources, and you're very welcome to use them. I've been asked today to speak on good nutrition in the early years. And I want to start on a positive note. I've been living back in this country for 10 years, and I would say 2016 was a bit of a turning point for us. It's the first time that child nutrition has got to the top of the political agenda, and it's really, really heartening for us to see that. And now it's a matter of how we can actually work together to maintain it. We are entering the decade for nutrition, UN Decade for Nutrition, and this is going to be really important for us to see how we can actually all work together to be able to scale our interventions up in relationship to nutrition. So today I'm going to look at what children are eating at the moment in the early years, their current nutritional status, the importance of investing in nutrition in the early childhood, how we can help children eat better whilst they're in the early years settings, looking at the Trust's Eat Better, Start Better programme, and the voluntary food and drink guidelines the Trust put together with the public health and early years sector, looking at the rationale and evidence for that piece of work, how that helps to define healthy, balanced and nutritious diet for children whilst they're in a setting, looking at how we have developed some resources to encourage children to eat well, giving an overview of practical resources, and then what are next steps, because we have the obesity plan now published and looking at some work that we've done towards that in terms of supporting that implementation more recently, and it's going to be published soon, and also looking at the policy around the 30 hours as well, because we have an opportunity there. So firstly, a little bit about the Trust. So basically, we help anyone and everyone to try and encourage more children to eat healthier. And our mantra is that if you eat better, you do better. We are a national charity, and we are an evidence-based organisation as well. And we're really trying to look at how we can help children eat better in both childcare, school, at home, and in wider community. So what are children eating? If we look at the evidence and the most recent National Dietary Nutrition Survey, in the early years they have too high a sugar intake, saturated fat intake and salt, too few fruit and vegetables, too little amount of oily fish, low intakes of fibre and low intakes of some vitamins and minerals, particularly vitamin A, iron and zinc. Iron's missing from there. What does that actually translate to in terms of their nutritional status? Well, we've heard a lot around statistics today. We've got more than a fifth of children entering in reception overweight or obese. We've got type 2 diabetes occurring in children. Although we've got few cases in terms of early years amongst children, it is beginning to appear type 2 diabetes in the child population, which is worrying. We've got poor dental health in many children, and more than 1 in 4 children at risk of iron deficiency. And already being referred to today, the State of the Child report that was published last month by the Royal College of Paediatric and Child Health has a really good section on early years. So why invest in nutrition? This actually explains a lot, this diagram, around scaling up nutrition programs. And nutrition, if you invest in nutrition, you make a much more resilient place, because you are then investing in a child's health currently, but also for their future in terms of them being parents, and that if they have good nutrition, they're much more likely to be able to learn, and they're much more likely, as a consequence of that, being able to contribute back to society. So you're actually helping to break that intergenerational link. The importance of early intervention has been spoken about a lot today, and all of the reports have been spoken about a lot today as well. And we really need to understand in terms of thinking about the interventions, and the earlier that we do the intervention, the better the health outcome. So the key message is start early. In terms of studies looking at that in particular in relationship to nutrition, there are a couple that I've picked out. So the early bird diabetes study demonstrates that most weight put on before and gained before the age of 5 actually then closely predicts weight at 9, which then basically reinforces the importance to ensure a healthy weight during the early years in terms of targeting public health interventions. If we also look at the ALSPEC study, the Avon longitudinal study of parents and children, this looked at different types of diet and the impact on academic achievement. And it demonstrated that children that ate a so-called junk food diet at the age of 3 was associated with lower school attainment at Key Stage 2. Again, another reason why we should be intervening in terms of children's diet. So the importance of early years has been looked at in terms of influencing their health, their development, learning, attainment, and economic participation. We know that early eating habits are developed right at very early in life, and to give children the best start in life, it's really crucial in terms of reducing health inequalities. So the key messages here are that early years is really important for children critically in their own right, but is also a foundation for success at school and in their adult life. So in terms of priorities for nutrition, we can need to think about this in terms of the range of priorities at different stages of the life cycle. And we can think about the interventions. And the one key area that I'm really interested in looking at is early year settings as a vital route to encourage young children and their families to eat well. Do we have anybody here from early year settings, children's centres or nurseries? Great. So really, they're very crucial. So in terms of the numbers of settings out there, we've got in England around 86,000 settings, and of those, about 56,000 of them are childminders. So we need to think about that in terms of when we want to develop and communicate to them about how will we get to the earlier settings in a really coherent way, and thinking about who they're delivering to, whether in childminders, it's in a home setting, and then obviously in nurseries, thinking about how we can link together with health as well. So helping children eat better in childcare. Our recommendations we published in a white paper in 2015, and we recommended in relationship prior to the obesity strategy being published that guidance should be available, training should also be encouraged, and funding should be available to ensure that all earlier settings have sufficient support. These recommendations were also published in the Ending Childhood Obesity report last year. They recommended clear guidance and support for caregivers. They recommended providing guidance to caregivers around the appropriateness of the wide variety of foods and in terms of portion sizes. Encouraging only healthy foods, beverages and snacks in childcare settings, and making sure that food, not just to be considered around what's on the plate, but also in the childcare setting in relationship to what the children learn about food as well. So, rationale and evidence for the voluntary food and drink guidelines. This is the guidance. So first of all, looking back in terms of what is their welfare requirement in relationship to earlier settings. They must provide healthy, balanced and nutritious snacks. They must also take into account children's special dietary requirements, their preferences and food allergens, and they must provide fresh drinking water. They must also record and act on children's dietary requirements. However, up until 6 years ago, nobody knew what that actually meant in practice in relationship to the provision of a healthy, balanced and nutritious diet. So the Trust was commissioned to set up a secretariat. We set up the advisory panel on early years nutrition, and we recommended to government that they maintain the welfare requirement around food and drink, that they did also develop national guidance, which was practical, that they developed and delivered a comprehensive training package. They provided a consistent sort of benchmarking and that there was a survey of food provision in early years was done to help bring up the evidence base about what was missing and what needed to be addressed. So we were commissioned under a voluntary community sector grant by the Department for Education to develop the Eat Better, Start Better programme. And basically, the programme looks at developing national guidance, so taking the statutory framework and translating that into practice. What does it mean? The Eat Better, Start Better programme looks at developing partnerships with local authorities and settings to help implement the voluntary food and drink guidelines to improve the health outcomes for children in the early years. The programme looks at using the national guidance and developing the national guidance together with the health sector and the early years sector. We pilot tested it to make sure that it was easy to understand. We developed an accredited training programme, and that accredited training programme was delivered face-to-face in 25 local authorities, but we've also translated the face-to-face training onto online to be able to make sure that it was accessible to health visitors and to childminders as well, in acknowledgement that sometimes it's quite difficult to actually get to face-to-face training. And most importantly, we developed a suite of evaluation tools that the local authorities and the settings could use to monitor the outcome and impact of that training on not just the practitioner's knowledge and confidence, but also looking at the before and after in relationship to their approach to and provision of food within the setting against those guidelines, and looking at if they rolled out the training, the cookery training to the parents, what impact did that have on the parents' eating habits at home, the family eating habits. So what's a healthy, balanced, nutritious diet? Now, I know I've got some nutritionists in here, so anybody like to hazard a guess? It's meant to be interactive, so I'm waiting for you to give me an answer. Anybody? Thank you. Yes, absolutely. You've read the slides. It's around eating a wide variety of foods from the different food groups. So we've got the 4 food groups, making sure around starchy food, fruit and vegetables, beans, pulses, fish, eggs and meat and other proteins, dairy and alternatives. And we know that if we eat a varied diet, they're much more likely. So we're on a mission to ban beige food and making sure your plate is really colourful. And in addition to that, we want to be able to give guidance back to settings around how often to provide those different food groups, which types of food to actually provide within those food groups, and also looking at additional guidance around desserts, puddings and cakes. We get lots of queries around whether children should be having those types of foods, how to hydrate children appropriately, looking at how to limit saturated fat, sugar and salt, and also having considerations around food additives and fortified foods. So I would encourage all of you to download a copy of the guidelines. You can use them in lots of different ways, not just with settings, but also with families as well, if you're working directly with families. Each of the food groups are explored in looking at the positive types of food and drink to provide, so the healthier versions, why that food group is important, and then looking at typical portion sizes. And we've designed it so this is Crown copyright. You can plagiarise it as much as you like, and I've got a copy of the guidelines here. And for each food group, there is a page with the portion sizes there. You could put them up in the kitchen for the practitioners to work towards, or actually provide them to the people that are actually serving the children the food as well. So they're for you to use. One of the key things we found, obviously, when we pilot tested the guidelines was that a lot of practitioners are working with no support at all. So the guidelines had to be very, very clearly written. So they're very short, audible statements, so that they knew what did it actually mean in practice. So where you see a tick in the guideline, it's a guideline that you should follow. Where there's a light bulb, there's good practice, and around food safety. But what's more important is the actual language. So they wanted to know, so how often could I actually serve chips or a sausage? So we looked at actually developing the guidelines and a nutritional framework against these and did some modelling with menus. And then we came up with a form of terminology and language and saying, well, actually, you can provide these types of foods, but on a limited basis, not just in relationship because we want to keep the saturated fat and salt down, for example, but also we want to be able to change children's eating habits as well, because we want to say that we want to introduce a variety of foods, and actually to have a sausage every day wouldn't be a most appropriate way to eat. So limit means actually not to provide more than once a week. And for foods like things like crisps and confectionery, we've said not to be provided, and sugary drinks. So they're not appropriate foods to be provided in an early year setting. So we've used the word avoid and made it so that the terminology and the language in the guidelines is really clear. And obviously, we don't shop by food group or nutrient, but we shop for meal occasions. So at-a-glance information is really key in relationship to translating the guidelines for each meal occasion. So we've created the guidelines for breakfast, lunch, snacks and tea. And that's really important because some settings only provide snacks, for example. So actually, they only need to go to page 11 out of an 80-page document, and they've got the information that they need. So what is also key, when we did the preschool survey, we found out that actually what the settings were actually providing was more like an older children's diet. So everybody's familiar with the Eatwell guide? So this Eatwell guide basically is a guide that is a healthy diet for older children and adults, which is low fat, lower sugar, lower salt, and a higher fibre diet. But this isn't appropriate for young children. We want to make sure that the food, because they have relatively small stomachs, they have to have quite a lot of energy in those small portions of food, and they need to be very nutrient dense as well. So for example, for children up to the age of 2, they need to have more of a whole milk and whole fat diet to make sure they're energy dense and sufficiently energy dense. So these are the kind of key messages and the content that we're providing to settings, and making sure and reinforcing those key messages around the varied diet. I'll leave you to read those at your leisure in the interest of time. But to us, it's not just about what's actually on the plate, it's also about encouraging children to eat well. And as we pilot tested the guidelines, we worked with settings to actually identify the key things that really are important to make sure children eat well. So one of the key things that we found was if we needed to have a food policy in place in settings, but that food policy must be developed with the staff, with the children and with the parents. So it's a shared vision of the types of foods that could be provided in the setting or brought in from home. And communicating with children and families is really crucial, and there's some really low-cost ways of doing that. So, for example, sharing the menu on your website, or actually giving the menus out to families as well. Making sure the eating environment is really appropriate, and giving opportunities to try different foods, giving children the safety of being able to spit the food out if they don't like it. But then obviously also being a role model there, practitioners to be there in the presence of making sure that they can be positive and in terms of their language, encouraging. And as you would have seen a couple of weeks ago around some of the research, we need to keep reinforcing and retrying foods to build children's repertoire of foods that they have. Giving some advice around celebrations is really crucial, and using that as an opportunity for learning, but also acknowledging that if you've got quite a large nursery, you could be having a lot of birthday cake, and thinking about how ways in which you could manage that. Then also key is making sure that food is there for all children. So helping and making sure dietary preferences are taken into account, cultural preferences as well. So there is a really good table in relationship to religious preferences in the book. Learning and about through food is really key for us, and looking at opportunities for growing food, cooking food, because we know that if children actually grow or cook the food, they're much more likely to eat it, which is really cool. In terms of cooking, I think the key message in the book is if you're going to cook with children, have fun and be prepared to have a bit of a mess. But it's really good fun, and they're much more likely to eat the food. Key to us is also around protecting children's health and giving the practitioners those pathways and how to have those more difficult conversations with parents around the weight of their child, and knowing where to get advice for that too. We developed with the early years membership organisations an early years code of practice as well for food and drink. So this is how we've got 7 principles which take the and look at the different areas. Key obviously is the guidelines, but also looking at the other areas I've just mentioned. If you aren't familiar with this, I really encourage, if you've got children in nurseries or with your childminder, get them to have a look at this and sign up to this. And all of the practical tools to what does that actually mean in practice are there for people to download. Going on to the practical tools, there are two seasonal example menus with recipes, and please use these even if you're not part of a setting, for example, but you're a health visitor or you're working with parents. These can be translated because we have put in meals, and each of those meals have been nutritionally analysed, but they are done for serves of 5 and for 20. So they're allowing for scaling up and down appropriately. And for each meal, they have been photographed as well to give examples of portion sizes. And the meals have been photographed on the plates. And to give you an idea in terms of the plates, we've actually got a resource at the back of the guide in terms of translating what does that actually mean in terms of portion sizes, because that's one of the key areas. So the portion size guidance is by food group, but it's also actually on the recipes as well. And we looked at the portion sizes giving a typical portion size for a 1 to 4 year old, but also looking at it in relationship to 1 to 2 year olds and 2 to 3 year olds. But the key messages around portion sizes is don't weigh, encourage children to eat to their appetite because they will do. Just use them as a visual guide. In terms of serving children, get them to self-serve. They're much more likely to be able to then eat to appetite. If you do get the practitioners to serve the food to children, then don't overface them with too much food. Get them to taste a bit, and then they will actually help to eat to appetite. And children are good at self-regulating. So, in terms of choosing healthy ingredients, it's really key for us and for settings to be able to feel confident. And since we developed the Eat Better, Start Better programme, there have been some really fantastic apps, but I've just given you all a present in relationship to how to interpret food labels. So please feel free to take this away. It's a bit of a calling card here. There on the front is, so on the side that's on the slide, it gives you an impression, gives you the information about choosing healthier foods against the voluntary front of pack labelling. On the back, there is the salt guidelines for children and adults, and also a list of colours that children shouldn't eat based on the Food Standards Agency research. So, because it's the end of the day, this is not a difficult question, but which baked beans, is it brand 1 or brand 2 that has the lower salt and sugar content? 2, yes, exactly. So we've tried to help there with the colour coding. You can see that that's really easy, isn't it, to use in terms of the colour coding, but not all manufactured foods have colour coding on them. And so basically you need to be able to also look at the back and do per 100 grams. And the key tips in terms of reading the label, we always get the practitioners to think about portion size, because on the back also of the manufactured food, they often put portion sizes, but they would most likely to be for adults, unless the food is actually marketed to children. And if it's marketed to children, it's much more likely to be for older children and under 5s. So you do need to think about portion sizes. Always use the nutritional values per 100 grams to help you compare products. And the front of pack labelling is really helpful in terms of a quick at a glance. But I would encourage you to go and have a look at the apps. I don't know if you've had a look at any of the apps that have come out. There are some really good ones where you can scan a barcode, and not only does it tell you that it's a healthier product within the same store or a different store, but also whether it's cheaper. So I can provide further guidance on where to go for the apps. In addition to the nutritional information, we've provided further additional fact sheets since we developed the Eat Better, Start Better programme, particularly around producing and sharing allergen information, which, as you all know, in Europe, the legislation changed. So now on the back of your packets of food, you now get in bold which allergens of the 14 allergens are there. Also, schools and early year settings, if they provide food, they must be able to share that information and have a verifiable route. So this guidance we wrote with the Food Standards Agency and for children to explain how they should do that, and that's one of the welfare requirements. Also, that came up since we developed the Eat Better Start guidance was around catering for special dietary requirements. So we've provided some further guidance around that. And most recently, the Common Inspection Framework that was introduced with Ofsted has a judgment in it in relationship to healthy eating. So we've put together a guidance around promoting and supporting healthy eating in early years as well to help settings to meet that judgment. So what's next? So we've got the 30 hours of free childcare coming, introduced in this next September. And this gives us an unprecedented opportunity to improve children's eating habits because more 3- and 4-year-olds of working parents are going to be eating more meals there. So if you are a working parent, then please ask your settings to start using some of this guidance. If you are a practitioner, please use the guidance that I've just explained today. And if you're a health visitor, please point your parents in the direction of the guidance because it's really key. We did a survey with practitioners with Nursery World in 2015, towards the end of that year, and we published them in January 2016. And there has been a concern raised that as a consequence of introducing this, how will settings actually cater for more children eating more food in the settings? And as a consequence of that, one of the issues was that they may be asking parents more likely to bring in packed lunches. So we've created a 2-page leaflet which basically translates the guidance I've just explained today, which is around provision of healthy packed lunches. And this is downloadable, can be printed by settings and given out to parents, can be given and it's there for you to use. So please feel free to download it as well. And it gives ideas around making sure how to store the food safely and to pack the food with your child. And then it also gives some guidance there around the universal free school meals, which children are entitled to once they leave the early years. So also, we had the Obesity Plan of Action that was published last August. The Trust was commissioned by Public Health England last year, and we've been asked to have a look at and revise the menus that I just showed you. So we were commissioned to revise these menus to reflect the dietary recommendations more recently published since we first put the voluntary food and drink guidelines together. So the menus needed to be updated to reflect lower energy intakes based on the second dietary reference values that were published in 2011, the reductions in the amount of free sugars, the added sugars, that were published in the carbohydrate report in 2015, and the increases in the amount of dietary fibre. So we had set up an external reference group last year. They met 5 times, and we have developed a new nutrient framework to model the menus. The menus are now looking at helping settings which are providing not just children food from 1 to 4, but also looking at children from the age of 6 months up to for their 5th birthday. So the menu have been extended. So basically the menus are based on 1 to 4-year-olds, but then the recipes are giving some advice in relationship to how to adapt for children 7 to 9 and 10 to 12 months. These menus and recipes, we published a draft version in the summer for people to comment on, and thank you for anybody who did comment on them, and they will be published shortly. Thank you. I don't know if you have any questions, because that was a real quick whirlwind tour of how to feed children well in the childcare.